Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 43 of the Hammer Territory podcast. I am Scott Coleman, and I am joined very late on this Wednesday evening by the great Stephen Tolbert after the Braves ended up playing a pretty wild and crazy game against the Diamondbacks, even if they came out on the wrong side.
What's up, Scott? Yeah, it was a fun game. These are games that I enjoy, even when the Braves lose. It was a well played game. Um, it's Arizona. It's a hitter park. You're going to play some kind of wild offensive games, and one of the Braves' better relievers had a bad night, and that happens. But yeah, it was a well played game. It was a fun game. There was back and forth, a lot of offense. But yeah, I mean, it sucks to lose, but the Braves are still in a position to win the series tomorrow. So these are ones I let these go pretty easily. But yeah, it was a fun game, and we're going to talk a little bit about the stuff that happened today.
Yeah, it kind of felt like after the Braves just completely stole that game on Monday night, that they were maybe due for one of these to swing against them. So, of course, now the 4-game winning streak is over. Although, as Steven said, I mean, the Braves played pretty well tonight for the most part. The offense continued to show some power, which was encouraging, and we're going to dive into plenty of that. But first, we should say that we are a proud member of the Foul Territory network of shows. We have also had quite a couple of shows on the feed this week, including one that you and Sean did very late on Tuesday night. I appreciate you all staying up late. I was actually at the games on Monday and Tuesday night in Chase Field, which were two just super fun games as a fan, as a spectator. The Chris Sale and Zach Gallen lived up to the hype. And then that Monday night game, they were just dead in the water and out of nowhere came back to win. So it's been an enjoyable series so far, even if tonight's game was not the best.
The Monday night's game, it was actually a pretty frustrating game to watch because the Braves had chance after chance after chance. They weren't doing anything. Had a rookie pitcher on the mound. Um, and then just boom, that bolt of lightning. Eddie Rosario had a really good at bat to keep the game going, and then Sean Murphy with that bolt of lightning that just rocket to right center field to tie the game. They played well in extras. They actually got unlucky in extras. They could have scored 3 or 4 more runs as well as they hit the ball. Won the game. Last night's game was fun. Obviously, Sale and Gallen. That was really cool that you got to go to that game. You could go to games your whole life and not see two pitchers match up as good as those two guys. So yeah, I mean, it's a tough place to play. If the series ended right here and you won 2 of 3, you'd be extremely happy, right? So, and the Braves have one of their best pitchers going tomorrow. So, yeah, I mean, it's a fun series. It's a crazy place to play at times. It's not quite Coors Field, but it has that feel to it sometimes. And tonight had a little bit of that. So, but yeah, fun, entertaining game.
For sure. And there were a ton of Braves fans at Chase Field. I don't know how well that came across on the TV broadcast, but they were very well represented out at Chase Field. So if we have any listeners out in Arizona who were at the games, a tip of the cap to you all. Let's dig into Wednesday night's game. If folks did not stay up late for it, a 7-5 loss, although there was a lot of action. Braves went up early, 2-0. Travis d'Arnaud, who was getting the start for Sean Murphy, hit a double off the right field wall to make it 2-0. Although, unfortunately, about 5 minutes later, Eugenio Suarez just launched a baseball off of Charlie Morton to tie it. Then in the next inning, Matt Olson had a sac fly to make it 3-2. And shortly after that, Ketel Marte, the National League starter at second base, just ripped a ball over the fence to make it 3-3. Stephen, I wanted to briefly mention Charlie Morton tonight and get your take on his performance. Overall, it wasn't bad, other than the 900 feet worth of home runs that he gave up. But 6 1/3 innings, 5 hits, 4 runs, no walks, and 5 strikeouts is hardly bad by any means. He worked into the 7th inning, which was helpful for the bullpen. It was, in some ways, it was very much the Charlie Morton experience.
He's had a little bit of the home run ball. The Giants hit a couple home runs off him in his last start, and that's really where he's paid most of the damage that's been done against him has been the home run ball. The strikeouts are a little bit down. You know, um, Sean and I talked about this last night. Like he's just a standard, like Charlie's just kind of a standard, back of the rotation. I call him a four starter. I think that's what he is, not only because he's the four starter in the Braves rotation, but even if the names in the Braves rotation were different, I'd still call him a four starter. That's kind of what he is. Um, you know, he had, there was 3 runs on the board when he actually left the game. but he had a guy on first, and that guy ended up scoring, so he got charged with four. I mean, I think you tweeted it out, but like that's a game that you take. Like if Charlie gives you that, pitches into the seventh inning, when he leaves the game, there's only 3 runs on the board for the other team. I mean, in a ballpark like that against a pretty good offense, like yeah, it wasn't perfect. And I know, people that don't like Charlie Morton or have strong takes about Charlie Morton will use this game as fuel for that. But I don't know. I agree with the tweet you sent. Like I don't think you can complain about that game if the Braves didn't win. So people will find a way to complain about anything. But from
Yeah.
Charlie Morton's perspective, like I think you just got to take that. I think you got to be happy with that.
Yeah, the Diamondbacks lineup is pretty good, especially against right-handed pitching. Quite a bit of thump from that left side. Corbin Carroll, Jock Peterson. They're a solid lineup, and I would agree with that. I think maybe it was not Charlie's A1 self tonight. I think an interesting way to evaluate pitchers, and of course there are 8 million stats these days, but it's kind of something simple that I've kind of picked up on lately is just add up the pitchers' ERA, their FIP, and their xFIP. If you want to throw in their expected ERA as well, and just divide those numbers by 3 or 4. And if you do that for Charlie Morton, it's right around 4. It's like 4.03.
Yeah.
That's very much Charlie Morton at this point in his career. I know a couple of years ago, his first year with Atlanta, he was so good. And he has not been that guy for the last couple of seasons. And I know Charlie is a bit of a lightning rod because he makes a lot of money. And that, of course, is no fault of his own. Good for him for getting that fat paycheck in free agency the last couple of years. But it is fair to say that he is, I think, pretty clearly the number 4 in the rotation right now.
Yeah. And listen, he makes $20 million. That's true. But it's on a 1 year deal. And if you go back, if people paid attention during the winter at what some of these starting pitchers were getting paid, every time one of these guys would sign, like Lance Lynn would sign a big contract, or, there would be guys who had like 6 year, Kyle Gibson, Lucas Giolito signed for like $40 million. Like every time one of these guys signed, I was like, man, I'm glad I have Charlie Morton at 1 year, 20 million. Like it just, I know that number is big and a lot of people associate it with probably something more than what it is, but 1 year, 20 million for a starting pitcher is very modest if we're being honest in today's game. And again, if you don't believe me, just go search any free agent tracker from the winter and just sort by starting pitching and just see what those guys signed for. 1 year, 20 million is very reasonable. He's probably a tad overpaid, but not that much, honestly. And yeah, he's a 4 starter. That's just what he is. And again, the Braves didn't lose this game because Charlie Morton. I mean, he pitched into the seventh. Again, when he left the game, there was 3 runs on the board. There was a guy on first and ended up scoring off a double. Once Pierce Johnson came in, but like if you give me that start every night for the rest of the year, or every time he's out there for the rest of the year, I'm gonna take it. Like I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna be fine with that. And I think in an honest moment, Charlie would probably say the same. I know he's a competitor. He wants to do better than that, but this is kind of what he is now. He's a 4 starter. Like, you expect your offense and your bullpen to pick up a little bit of the slack, and the offense did a decent job tonight. The bullpen couldn't finish the job, but that's baseball.
And then in the 8th inning, the Braves found themselves down 5-3 after that aforementioned, not blow up, but Pierce Johnson came in for Charlie and really was not very effective, although he was not exactly getting hammered on pitches in the middle of the plate. There were just a couple of good approaches from the Diamondbacks to plate those 2 runs. But Marcell Ozuna came up in the top of the 8th with the Braves down 2 and launched a baseball to center field. I'm sure a lot of our listeners probably haven't been to Chase Field. If you hit a ball to the upper deck of center field in that ballpark, you absolutely launched it. I think it was something like 435 feet for Marcell. And in some ways to that Monday game, it just kind of felt like the Braves were back to doing what they did so well the past couple of years, where even when they were down late, they would always give you a fight. And sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. But it was just an impressive shot for Marcell to get that ball over the center field wall.
Yeah, I think it's four. I think the actual measurement's like 410 or 411, the
Yeah,
wall itself, but
it's
it's like
crazy.
it's like a 25-foot wall or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, to clear that wall is a serious poke, and he cleared it pretty easily. There were some bombs hitting this game. I mean, the Diamondbacks hit a couple bombs. The Braves hit, Marcel. Obviously, that bomb was huge. It was a weird game. I just looked at the box score. I just noticed every time the Braves scored, the Diamondbacks scored the exact same amount of runs in the bottom half of the inning. So like the Braves scored in the second, the third, and the eighth, and the Diamondbacks also scored in the second, the third, and the eighth. It was just a weird game. The Braves just could never kind of get a lead and then hold it for a few innings and build some momentum. Just one of those games. I mean, it happens. But yeah, Marcel's been amazing, right? I mean, that's 75 RBIs in just past the first half of the season. He's on pace for like 130, 140 RBIs this year. Close to 50 homers. I mean, he's just been a monster. He's been a monster all year and kept it up. And the Braves had chances. I mean, the Braves could have, they could have added on more. They had Orlando Arcia trying to bunt, which was if you weren't watching the game, it was I don't know if I would call it a highlight or a low light, but it was entertaining. But they had guys on base. They were probably one or two hits away from putting up 8 or 9 runs. Just didn't work out tonight. But yeah, great for Marcel. He keeps it going. He had a little bit of a lull there, but he's kind of back. He was it was a pretty short lull for him, and now he's back to mashing baseballs. So yeah, that was awesome to see. I hate that Joe Jimenez had a bad night. It left everybody with a bad taste, but at least the Braves are fighting. Like you said, the Braves are, they're coming back in games. They're scoring runs. They're giving their team a chance to win. The offense is not just laying down like it was for so long. So certainly take that.
And in some ways, it was very uncharacteristic for Joe Jimenez to have the blow up in the eighth inning, loaded the bases with no outs. And it was like, man, if he gets out of this, he might actually be Houdini. Unfortunately, he did not. A bases loaded walk to Christian Walker. I thought it was actually a hell of a plate appearance by Walker because he spit on 3 or 4 pitches just off the plate. And for Jimenez, I think folks know this. I know anytime the Braves lose a close one, a 50-50 game like this, emotions are always higher. But that was the first time since June 12th that Joe Jimenez has surrendered a run. So we're talking about a full month of really good work. And even with the blow up where he gave up 2 runs, his ERA on the season sits at 2.75. He has a 2.84 FIP. And the only number that's kind of interesting in his profile, he has an elevated xFIP of 4.19, but that's really just a product of giving up no home runs all year. And that can be a little fluky season over season. But I think for Joe, it was just hopefully a blip on the radar, but nonetheless, a bad performance tonight. Let's call it what it was.
Yeah, I get annoyed sometimes with people just because, listen, I've done it before. Like if I feel like Snit has done something that by process can't be explained, then I think we're pretty fair on the show that we will call that out. Like if it doesn't make sense. Using Joe Jimenez tonight in the eighth inning of a tie game, like that makes perfect sense. Like there was people in my mentions like saying like, why is Joe Jimenez and like, they wanted AJ Minter. All that is just basing your opinion on the results. It went bad, so it was a bad move, and I hate that level of analysis. That's nonsense. Joe Jimenez has been one of the Braves' best pitchers all season long. Like you said, it's been like a month since he gave up a run. People were talking about how there was 3 lefties to start the inning, and so it should have been Minter. And that sounds great, but if you go look at the actual numbers, Jimenez has dominated left-handed pitching all year long. He's dominated right-handed pitching too. He's dominated everybody. So, I mean, Snit went with one of his best relievers in a tie game in the eighth inning. There's nothing wrong with that. It just didn't work. I mean, that happens. So, yes, when I do think Snit has some crazy tendencies when it comes to the bullpen, and we talk about those when they happen, but I don't think tonight was that. I mean, I think he used one of his best relievers in the biggest spot. And it just didn't work. It just wasn't his night. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's baseball.
Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't bounce your way. But in the ninth inning, the Braves, I mean, everyone was kind of holding out a little bit of hope against Paul Sewald in the ninth inning, who had blown 3 consecutive saves with home runs, including that one on Monday night. But sadly, even with a couple of hard contacts, including a rocket from Travis d'Arnaud, the Braves could not do anything in the ninth and unfortunately lost 7-5 to snap the winning streak. Before the game, there was some interesting roster maneuvering from the Braves. Stephen, the Braves might have actually kind of like exposed a rule about manipulating the injured list. On the surface, the roster move itself was nothing special or eye-opening. They optioned AJ Smith-Shawver back to Gwinnett after 1 day on the big league roster. They finally placed Ramon Laureano on the 10-day injured list with an oblique strain. They recalled Dylan Lee, who was sent down 24 hours ago, although Lee never actually left the team. He stuck around in Phoenix. And the club returned Brian Anderson from his rehab assignment after having a bacterial infection of some kind. And Stephen, you did some research and some digging on this with somebody pretty close to the team. In some ways, the Braves seemingly kind of manipulated the rule a little bit, and I wanted you to share kind of what your research returned.
This is probably interesting to like 10 people. This is some roster, baiting stuff that it goes into kind of the rules of the game and the rules that dictate how you maneuver your players throughout a season. But so essentially is the rule when you option a pitcher, like the Braves option Dylan Lee, that pitcher has to stay down in AAA for 15 days unless he is coming back up to replace somebody going on the IL. And that's been a rule for years now. The assumption was from me, from everybody, kind of, our battery power guys. I was DMing with the beat writers. Their assumption, everybody's assumption was that the only way you can get a pitcher back up early is if a pitcher is the one who's being IL'd. For instance, you can't, the Braves couldn't have IL'd Laureano to bring up Dylan Lee because there's a pitcher limit on the roster. You can only have 13 pitchers on the roster, and obviously ILing a position player to bring up a pitcher would be 14 pitchers. So everybody just has assumed all this time that if you wanted to get a guy up early and didn't have to wait 15 days, the only way to do that would be to IL a pitcher. Well, the Braves today, instead of ILing a pitcher, what they did was they essentially combined two different moves. They optioned AJ Smith-Shawver and IL'd Ramon Laureano, and then called up Dylan Lee and Brian Anderson. So essentially what they did is they IL'd a position player to bring up a pitcher. And before today, and I was texting with somebody pretty close to the team who actually ended up texting Alex Anthopoulos to get a clarification on this. Nobody knew that was allowed. And so it is a bit of a loophole. It's probably something that's going to get closed up in the offseason because there's no logical reason why that should be allowed. But yeah, the Braves kind of manipulated the roster rules to get Dylan Lee back up to the roster only 2 days after they had optioned him, without having to put a pitcher on the IL. So that obviously helped, get the roster the way they wanted it. But yeah, nobody knew that, or at least the number of people that I talked to who follow the sport very closely, none of them knew it, and I didn't know it either. So yeah, a little interesting detail, but
yeah,
Alex Anthopoulos, credit to him. They're always kind of pushing the envelope on that stuff, and obviously it worked.
Yeah, and hey, you know what? It gave the Braves some insurance on Tuesday night with Smith-Shawver. God forbid that Chris Sale go down with an injury in the first inning, and you have to cover 9 innings after an 11-inning game the night before. You have to have somebody who can really cover your butt. So ultimately, there was nothing of great consequence to the 26-man roster. Although it was interesting, and just talking to Stephen before the show and just kind of the digging that he was doing with people around the team, it was pretty interesting nonetheless. A note on Ramon Laureano that he has actually not appeared in a baseball game since June 26th. So we are going on 2 full weeks since he last played. I believe it was actually that doubleheader in St. Louis. And clearly the Braves just don't have a ton of great minor league options right now, especially that Brian Anderson was away and then rehabbing with the injury. So there's not like there's this long line of talented outfielders in Gwinnett waiting for their moment. So nonetheless, that was the roster move of the day. All right, Stephen, we are going to look ahead to both Thursday's game and also talk about a pretty exciting show we have coming up on the podcast. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. All right, Stephen, this 4-game series in Arizona will wrap up on Thursday evening. I'm very sorry to say that it is yet another 9:40 p.m. Eastern time start out in Arizona, which is a little odd considering it's getaway day for both teams. But alas, what are you going to do? Get that coffee ready. It's going to be Max Fried with a chance for the Braves to win 3 out of 4 against the Diamondbacks, against Brandon Pfaadt, who became a postseason hero for the Diamondbacks last year. He is pretty good. It may not quite be Chris Sale versus Zach Allen, but it is a pretty good pitching matchup overall.
That kid for Arizona had a really big postseason. I was actually one of their top prospects last year. He had a pretty rough season actually. I remember looking at one point he had an ERA in like the sixes, but really kind of found himself late. Like you said, he was a pretty big piece of that World Series run they made. He's got good stuff. I mean, obviously on paper you would take Max Fried over. How do you say his last name again?
It's fought like I
Fought.
fought the guy down the street.
Gotcha. Yeah, fought. It's spelled like Pfaadt or something like
Yeah,
that.
I,
But
I
yeah,
looked it up. Admittedly, I looked up the Diamondbacks media guide because I was not sure either.
yeah. I've actually always wondered how you say that name. So now I know. But yeah, you would always obviously prefer Max in this situation. It's definitely advantage Braves on paper. But it's Arizona. It's a tremendous hitter's park. Anything can happen. This kid has had some success in big moments. So he can pitch. It'll be a fun game. I do hate that it's an 8:40 start, or 9:40, I guess. I'm Central Time, but yeah, 9:40 for the East Coasters. I was hoping for maybe a day game to get a break from, because obviously the Braves are going to San Diego after this and are going to have more late games. But, it's West Coast baseball. It's part of it. But it'll be a fun game. I would love the Braves to get this one tomorrow to win the series. I would hate to win the first 2 games and then have to leave with a split. That would be kind of disappointing. Although you would probably have taken a split when the series started. Winning the first 2, you would hope to at least win the series. So it'll be a good game. Hopefully Max can come out and pitch well. He did not have his best start against Philly the other day, so I'm sure he's looking to bounce back and get one more good one before the All-Star break. So it'll be a good game tomorrow, and hopefully the Braves can come out with a series win.
Yeah, if you take out those 2 uncharacteristically bad starts against the Phillies, Max has been so good, like as good as basically anybody, other than maybe his own teammate, Chris Sale. So let's hope that Max gets back on track. Again, a 9:40 p.m. Eastern time start at Chase Field. And then, I guess a good note for the Braves is once they wrap up this trip to Arizona and San Diego, correct me if I'm wrong, but they've already done the LA and Seattle trip earlier in the year. So I think all that's left on the West Coast in the second half of the season would be a trip to Coors Field and to play the Giants. And I think that's it. Am I missing anybody, Steven?
Let me double check. So I know they have already done. I know they did the Dodgers. Let me see. They have.
Maybe the Angels. Now I'm thinking
Yeah,
about.
so they've got one more big trip, and it's in the middle of August. So they go to Coors Field for 3. They go to San Francisco for 4, and then they go to the Angels for 3, and that's
Oh, wow.
all. That's all in one trip. So it's like a 10-day West Coast trip.
Wow. Well, I
Uh,
know anytime Atlanta comes out west, folks kind of groan a little bit with the very late first pitches. And I get it. I'm out here on the West Coast, so it doesn't bug me quite as much. But man, that is a hell of a trip in middle of August for the Braves. But at least 2 of those teams are terrible, like actually terrible in Colorado.
Legitimately, like maybe 2 of the worst teams in baseball, and will be worse at that point because it'll be after the trade deadline. So a lot of the good players will already be gone.
Yeah, there you go. So folks get about a month break from these midnight Eastern time finishes, which I'm sure everybody is looking forward to. We have an exciting show coming up on the Hammer Territory Network in the next couple of days. So longtime listeners, and I'm talking really longtime listeners of the Talking Chop podcast back in the day, which was started by our very own Brad Rowland and Carlos Collazo, who is now a Major League Baseball draft writer for Baseball America. Carlos does fantastic work. Brad and Carlos have reunited to do a preview of the draft, which actually begins on Sunday. Admittedly, I am not a huge draft person. I am out of my comfort zone in that I think it's probably sneaking up on a lot of people, especially with the unconventional timing of it. Imagine if the NFL draft was in week 9 of the season, or if the NBA and NHL had it after 45 games. Be a little unconventional. But nonetheless, we will have a fantastic show on the feed with Carlos and Brad on Friday, which will have a complete and comprehensive look ahead to the draft, both for everybody and who the top prospects are, but also a focus on the Braves.
Can't wait to listen to that show. Carlos does fantastic work. Not only does Carlos write for Baseball America and cover their draft, but I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, MLB Network actually partnered with Baseball America, and Carlos actually does the broadcast. Carlos is on the MLB Network broadcast for the draft, and breaks down players as they get selected. So, and obviously Brad and Carlos go way back. Starting this very podcast, believe it or not, was started by those two guys many moons ago. So yeah, that's a great one. I can't wait to listen to that. I'm very much like Scott. I am not a draft guy. I'm not even really a prospects guy. So much less amateur prospects. So that'll be fantastic. I think that's coming out Friday, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, check your feeds, especially if you're a draft guy. Again, like Scott said, it's coming up rapidly. I mean, it's 3 or 4 days away. And the Braves, the Braves are, they're one of the best teams of baseball, so they're not picking high in the draft. But, MLB draft is a little different, especially with the bonus pool system. A lot of teams don't necessarily pick the best players at the top. They work the system, get better players in the later rounds. So even teams that draft later in the draft can have really big drafts. So I do know enough about the draft to know that, at least. So yeah, that'll be a great show with Brad and Carlos.
It really will. So again, be sure to check out the feed on Friday. Should be in your feeds soon. Looking forward to that. A big thank you to Carlos for taking the time. I am sure he is in the very busiest time of year for him and the great guys and gals at Baseball America. Stephen, that's going to do it for us on this late Wednesday, now Thursday morning edition of the show. Again, a frustrating loss, or a disappointing loss, I guess, on tonight at Chase Field. But overall, I thought the Braves played pretty well. It was the definition of a 50-50 game. And let's hope they can go out there on Thursday and win the series against the Diamondbacks team that's been playing really well.
Yeah, and that's the other part of this. Diamondbacks are, like you said, it's a good offense, man. They have a really good offense. Like, they're really balanced. They can mix and match really well, like left and right. I really like their team. I know they haven't played great all year, but that's a good team. And this would be a really good, if you can win tomorrow, take 3 out of 4 in their park after sweeping them in Atlanta early in the year. I mean, that's strong baseball. So yeah, here's to Max. Hope he can go out and bounce back from that rough performance against Philly and win a series tomorrow. That'd be fun.
Let us hope if they could take 3 out of 4 to start this West Coast trip, really put you on good footing heading into San Diego against a equally good Padres team that is in the playoffs if the season was over tomorrow. That is going to do it tonight for Stephen and myself. A big thank you to everyone who tuned in. We will be back soon, again, with the aforementioned MLB Draft preview show with Brad and Carlos. I believe Brad and I are also going to be doing a show on Sunday in our normal time slot, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. He is Stephen Tolbert. You can follow Stephen at B_outliers on Twitter/X. I am Scott Coleman at Scott Coleman 55. Have a great day, everybody, and we will see you all next time.